Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Cacao Conversations. And full disclosure, I'm not drinking cacao, and I don't think Mary or Karina are drinking cacao either. And that's okay, because we are running high on the energy of Egypt. We all just got back from a 2-week journey to Egypt, and I wanted to bring them on just to share what is different about going to Egypt with spiritual people, because yes, you can go visit Egypt like it's a museum and go see all the sites, and that's fantastic and special. But if you know me, you know that's not the reason I go to Egypt. And I go for the energy, for the downloads, for what comes through in that space. And so Mary is, I always call her my Egyptologist, because like everybody should have their own Egyptologist. And so Mary is very LinkedIn tuned in, and that's why I go with her. And this time we also had the pleasure of Karina joining us, who specializes in geomancy. And I know all of you are going, what? But we're going to have her explain that. So first, Mary, just quick introduction. Tell our audience, I know many of them have seen you before, but just quick introduction of who you are and what you do.
Yes, well, my name is Mary Lomando, and I am an astrologer. I'm a Jungian astrologer, which means that I do karmic astrology, which encompasses your past lives, your dream symbols, archetypes, all of that good stuff. And I'm also an Egyptologist. I was an astrologer first for many years, and then I went to Egypt, and I call it the conversion experience that I personally had at the Sphinx. And while I was there, I was probably in 1990, I just got called. And when I got called, it was like, okay, I had to figure out how to come back and be in Egypt and understand all this, because it was like a tone that emitted out of the Sphinx itself. And I was with a group, and the group was a very specialized metaphysical group studying different things about esoteric Egyptology and alchemy and all of that good stuff. But I was in my own little world there at the Sphinx. And it was like, I'm hearing things and seeing things. And it was like my first experience in Egypt. So I thought, okay, whatever this is, I want more of it. And I figured out how to arrange my life so that the next year I went back to Egypt and studied at the American University in Cairo and got a second undergraduate degree in Egyptology. Then I lived and worked there. So it's kind of like the esoteric experience of being an astrologer, being metaphysical, being into psychology, symbols, all of that good stuff. And then Egypt was like, oh my gosh, I'm plugging into like the biggest battery on planet Earth. And so that was my personal experience of how I ended up from astrology to Egyptology, and now do both.
Awesome. And then Karina is joining us from Denmark. And please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yes, absolutely. My name is Karina Larsen, and I'm a clairvoyant and a geomancer. And like what Julieta was saying before, nobody probably knows anything about what geomancy is. So I'll just very briefly explain what that is. It basically is to learn to work with the energies that you find at sacred sites. So it's like seeing the earth as a living being. And then what a geomancer does is very similar to if you go and get acupuncture. You get maybe little needles in at different pressure points in the body. So it's quite similar what a geomancer does out at the different sites that we visit. We can tune in clairvoyantly, and then if there's anywhere that there's stuck energy, we would do a little healing at the site and clear it in order to get down to the original pattern and the original energies that were there at a site. So that's pretty much the thing about geomancy. Sometimes it can take a very long time to find out what's at a site, depending on what's been happening there before. So it's always really good to know the history of a place. If wars happened there, if people were killed there, or something really kind of I would say, something special happened and you find out about it, it sort of helps you understand a little bit better what it is that you're looking at or what you're picking up when you're going to a site for the first time. So that's a little bit about that.
How did you come into doing the geomancy work?
So when I was about 30 years old, I had this massive depression, and it was almost like I knew that what I was doing in my life was definitely not what I was meant to do. And then I had a vision. I saw a blue angel, and she told me that it won't be long, but your life is going to change quite a bit. And then when I was doing a project in New York, I was doing a project for the workplace that I used to be at. I met somebody who asked if I would do some healing on his father had Alzheimer's, and I agreed to do that. So I did for about a year, did some healing. But what I noticed when I was doing healing was I noticed sacred places. It was almost like opening the book to Indian mythology. And then I did a little research to find out, what am I looking at? Because I know when people do healing, they would say, oh, I could see something wrong with the heart or whatever, but I was seeing sacred landscapes. And then I decided to figure out what that's all about. So I did a little research, and I found somebody online who was describing exactly the same things that I was seeing in people, but he was seeing it out in landscapes. And I found this guy who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Richard Leviton, and I decided to send him an email. He responded in a couple of hours, and so I thought, well, that's fabulous. And he said he would do like a special course for me. And I went there, spent 10 days out in the landscapes, like we were meditating 10 hours for 10 days. And that's how I learned about geomancy. And I wanted to find out, how did you come across these tools, and how did you find out about them? And he mentioned that he had been going to a clairvoyant center in Hawaii to learn his basic tools. So I decided also to enroll in the Clairvoyant Center of Hawaii, and I was learning all kinds of stuff there for about 9 years. So developing my clairvoyance, learning healing skills. But the main thing and my main passion is the geomancy, is working with the landscapes. So, but the clairvoyance is just a nest, like that's how I approach geomancy. It's through clairvoyance.
Makes total sense. So I'm curious, it's funny because we were together for 2 weeks, but we were all, because we just kept going and going and going, we didn't get to talk a lot about what you experienced in these sacred sites. So I'm wondering if you can pick one or two of the sites we visited that really stood out to you, and like as a geomancy practitioner, like what did you find there, and what did you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one place that really activated something inside of me, I could say that actually was Abydos. And that was where normally it's known that Osiris's head was buried at Abydos. In geomancy, we call that particular feature a head of God. And that really did stir up something inside of me. I had an amazing dream after being there. And literally, I felt like my heart was on fire, and that it almost felt like the eye of my heart opened up. And I walked down some stairways and saw inside of myself a massive temple made of red granite. And I know that that whole experience was triggered by going to Abydos. It felt like I was walking through gateways inside of myself. In fact, it felt like I was walking through gateways to get to the realm of the dead, but then I was able to come back up and be in my body. But in the meantime, it was like I woke up in that dream and talked from the friend that I was sharing a room with when we were in Egypt. And it's quite a unique experience. It's something I've never experienced before, seeing my own body, or the insides of my own body, as a temple. and realizing that all of the spells and all of the hieroglyphics in the temple at Abydos somehow activated things inside of me, so that my inner temple got activated. So that was really quite something.
Very special. Any other highlight you want to talk about?
Yeah, you are the general.
And you want me to share another story or something else?
I would love to. Yes.
Okay. All right. So we were staying at a beautiful hotel right on the Nile. And what I discovered was that the waters of the Nile somehow interact with your dreams. So I was in another dream that I had there, and it's quite funny because normally when I do geomancy, the things happen at the sites. But here in Egypt, because it wasn't like a geomancy-centric trip, we were together with a group, and so we were kind of following along and all of that. So, but the temples were working with me anyway, because that's just how I'm built. So what I noticed, I was in one of my dreams, I was in this huge pyramid. And the pyramid had a very big chamber up the top, and the chamber was made of silver and gold. And I was up there. I was holding a small child in my arm, and to me it seemed like this is my brother. And there was a girl walking behind me when we left this big chamber, the big golden and silver chamber upstairs. And the girl that was with me was the student who also traveled with me in Egypt. But it seemed like doorways were open to a past life, and I was seeing myself probably meeting her for the first time and somehow holding my brother. So we walked down some stairs in this pyramid that I was in the dream, and we walked into a room, and the room was I think it was half full of water. So I was walking through water, even though there was no resistance from the water. So it was just like the water didn't act like water. It was just kind of an energy, but it looked like water to me. I opened some golden doorways, like double golden doorways into another room, but the water didn't flow out. It just stayed. And so I was accessing another dimension. And I know that both the waters of the Nile, but also the temples, and especially going to the pyramids and all of that, is definitely somewhere I've been there before. I've been there before in this life, but I've also been there before in the past. And when you walk in your own footsteps to places that you've been in the past, it starts to activate things inside of you. So I know in Egypt, it felt like for me that this was where I first came in. And that was a feeling I had when we visited the Sphinx. I'm like, well, this is where we landed. This is where we came in. And we may have gone our separate ways. I'm sure some of us went our separate ways afterwards, but it felt like I'm entering through Egypt, and I will also be leaving through Egypt. So those were some pretty big pictures that I got. Yeah, also at the Sphinx. Yeah.
Very cool. And just I tell people all the time that if Egypt even calls you a little bit, you need to listen to that call and get yourself there. And whether you go with Mary, which I absolutely recommend because she does an amazing job of holding the space and guiding you through that experience there. But if Egypt calls, like, you need to listen, because going there will activate something inside you. And it is like an initiation going there. So thank you for sharing those incredible stories. And so, Mary, I mentioned beforehand, you're the astrologist first. And so I know each time when you plan a trip, you're also looking, when you're selecting the dates, you're looking at the astrology of that. And so I would like you to explain to our listeners, like, why we went the dates that we did for this trip, and why we chose the date that we chose to be at private time at the Pause of the Sphinx.
Well, it's an interesting story that goes back to November of 2025 for the full moon. 2025, the full moon was at November 4th. And that full moon had a sort of a interesting correlation because it was when the comet Third Eye Atlas was just passing by Earth. So Third Eye Atlas has been with me for a little bit since June of 2025, tracking it and kind of feeling the energy of the messenger type of energy that's coming in with that. And I didn't really intend to go in March of 2026. But that day at the Pause of the Sphinx, when we were doing our private time for that full moon, I got this message that it was like, okay, you're going to be back in March around the spring equinox. Three Eye Atlas is going to be back around again, which it was. And the idea was that the star goddesses were returning. And I wasn't sure what that meant, but I thought, well, if they're going to return, going to be there, and we'll have people who are there who want to be there at the same time, whoever gets that call or that feeling. And then I think the next time I talked to Karina, which is maybe a month later, we were talking astrology on the phone, and she told me a dream that she had about seeing people at the Sphinx, and it was just like this beautiful congregation of people, but it had to do with that full moon. And I knew that she gave me the confirmation that that trip in March was going to happen. And I think I might have even joked and said, well, I don't know if it's just you and I, but we'll be there at the Pause of the Sphinx for the next round of Third Eye Atlas, which is right around the spring equinox. So astrology is always the basis of why I choose to go, especially for the private time. And picking those dates of private time is really important for me. But the idea is that this particular crossover of the end of 2025 into the spring of 2026, and we're still into it pretty much until the end of April, that wave of energy that's coming through is all about birthing. We're rebirthing, not just inside of ourselves something new, but the entire planet, the whole evolutionary scale of humanity is also birthing something. Now, it might not look that way when you look at 3D and say, well, I don't know, Mary, it doesn't look much like birthing going on, but that's part of it because this process is never easy at the beginning. And with Aries, which we're in the season of Aries right now, we just had a full moon 24 hours ago, and that had so much packed into it. But by the new moon in Aries on the 17th, we will have 6 out of 9 planets in the sign of Aries, plus the asteroids Chiron and Eris. So that Aries energy is all about volatility. It's about moving forward. It's about having courage. And as we know in Egypt, that's the energy of the goddess Sekhmet. And that divine, fierce, feminine energy, the energy that says, okay, we're going to create this no matter what it takes, is how women give birth. I mean, they're not sitting there like knitting, usually, they're giving birth. This is all about primal stuff. And if we're thinking about evolutionary primal stuff going on right now, you can hear astrologers talk about this all the time. This Aries lineup as an astrologer well into like 6 decades of astrology, I have never seen this before. And all astrologers are saying the same things. So we're getting ready in it. We're in this cycle of birthing. We're in the cycle of newness. We're in the cycle of courage. And we're in the cycle of very strong divine feminine energy. So when I think of divine feminine energy, of course, I think of Egypt. But of course, there's goddesses and pantheons and deities all over the planet and all cosmologies talking about this now. So we're in this birthing of something new, something that's never been seen on the planet, that has to do with love, compassion, and the return of the divine feminine on planet Earth. How I encapsulated that was, okay, March 2026 will be at the Pause of the Sphinx for whatever this rebirthing is, because it's all lining up. And of course, that had to do with all the goddesses, the star goddesses returning. And there we all were, with one star man amongst us, our little group of 8. And we were there receiving that. And the way I look at Egypt is like, if you're, you can be very conscious of what you're doing in Egypt and really resonating and vibing, with the energy in the temples, or you can kind of just be there. And then it's almost like a passive reaction, but it's a reaction nonetheless, because that temple will involve you with whatever the process is that you need to feel. And so the way I look at it is I'm always in conversation with the temples. It's like being in conversations with an old friend. You can be friends with someone for 30 years and you can talk to them every day and you still have something to say. It's never the same conversation. There's always something new going on. And when I'm in a temple, I feel that. It's like there's a conversation that's going on. And in some places, I can feel the conversations that are going on for other people. Like Karina said, stepping into Abydos, she felt a whole energy come forth inside her, which she felt as new. But feeling it from my perspective, it was like, yeah, she was just coming home to something that was already a part of her. And opening those doors inside each temple is something that I just give access to. Everyone brings their own self to that. And Egypt is kind of like, it's like a machine, really. When you go in these temples, they activate you as well as you being activated. Or a lot of New Age people think, oh, I'm going to this temple and I'm activating the temple. Well, on one level, we are, because it's a really proactive process. But a lot of times, most people, especially people who are on the sort of like not really sure what's going on level, once they're there, the temple actually works on them. And then, as Karina said, when you retrace your steps and maybe go back twice or 3 times, or, like Julietta, you've been there like 4, 5. I have people who go with me who've been like 7, 8, 9 times to Egypt with me. So it's like it becomes part of you. And then what you're doing is you're helping to activate this gateway or doorway or portal, if you want to call it, which Egypt is, for the rest of humanity to receive that cosmic sustenance, that energy that comes through the portals in Egypt. A lot of them are different, but the Sphinx to me is always like the motherlode. It's like, just as Karina said, it's like where we come in, if you're a certain soul group, and where you will go out. You don't physically need to be standing there when you decide to leave the planet, but it's this idea of the soul group that you came in with. And that soul group, I totally believe, is connected to Atlantis, pre-Atlantean Egypt, and also the star Sirius, which is the home of Isis. So all of that, star goddesses return, and that's why I chose that day to be in Egypt this spring.
As you were speaking, it was the thing that stood out for me the most on this trip was, the only way I can describe it is closure. And I don't remember exactly where we were, but I had this moment of, I don't need to come to Egypt anymore to experience Egypt, because Egypt now is completely within me. And my previous trips, when I left Egypt, I left with this feeling that I have to come back. And this is the first time I left the trip, and I said, I don't have to come back again. It doesn't mean I won't come back again. And funny story, like literally I was home for a few days and a friend approached me and said, I want you to take my friends to Egypt. I was like, oh, okay. I guess now that I've released the attachment of needing to go back, it will facilitate it and allow me to go back more easily and more readily. But yeah, just being in those temples and those sites, it definitely has activated whatever that that energy, that gift that Egypt has to offer all of us. It's like now fully alive and active within me. And I don't need anything outside of me to connect with that. And like I had that knowing, and then I come back. And so last night I had a cacao ceremony here for the full moon. And I just decided, and yes, it's not Mary's blue lotus, but I do have some blue lotus that I make tea with here. And so I brewed the cacao with the blue lotus, and we had Sekhmet and Isis and some other things there to bring in that energy of Egypt. And all of the women that were present at the cacao ceremony have been to multiple cacao ceremonies of mine. And they all said, like, hands down, without a doubt, there was something extra special about that cacao ceremony. And I know it wasn't so much the cacao or that I made it with the blue lotus, but that I brought in that energy from Egypt that we all, you know, lived in for those 2 weeks. I brought that here into that space. And it is, I feel like a lot of times it's something you can't put words to, but when you felt it, when you've experienced it, you can't deny its presence.
Well, I had a friend of mine who once said on, the bottom of my brochure when, I advertised for the trip, they have to say, warning, go at your own risk because you will be back again. It's almost like if, and even the people I work with in Egypt, the tour company people, they can't believe, they see people bring, tour leaders bring people over. And then, most people go to Egypt once in a lifetime and that's it. They've done Egypt and that's it. But with my groups, people have come back, like 3, 4, 5 times. And what it is I think, again, it's a certain soul tribe, if you will, that there is something about retracing those steps and opening the door a little wider. Like you came back and people wanted to go with you because they feel the energy you're emitting. It's like a sound. It's like that sound I heard at the Sphinx. It's indecipherable on the 3rd dimensional level, but once you raise your frequency up to 4, 5, 6 and above, you hear these things that normally people don't hear. And so people don't know that they're hearing it because it's a vibration. However, how it's being translated is, oh, I want more of that. And if it's someone who's a seeker, who's an initiate on the path, they're going to say, well, I need, like I did in the beginning, I need to go back there. And I couldn't just travel there. I had to live there and immerse myself and sleep in the temples and do all that, which back then it was much, much easier to do that. I don't know if you'd be able to. I guess if somebody had intention strong enough, they'd be able to do it. But
I'm working on it.
Yeah, the powers that be make it a little bit more difficult than back then, where there were not so much rules and regulations about things. But also, it was a simpler world. 35 years ago, it was a simpler world on so many different levels. So now we're in this accelerated frequency. So things are picking up, and people who may have never felt like they wanted to travel or go to a sacred site or, get some of that energy, whatever it is, are waking up because that's the vibration we're in now. So I'm sure Karina's work is going to get more exponentially increased and expanded as well, because those sites are talking. And not only do we have the ancient sites that are talking, but we have new sites that are opening up. Like, the ancient ones are there, like the ancient mountaintops and things like that. But we're also having these new pockets open, which to me is really exciting because it's not really work that I know how to do. But I can imagine that, for someone like yourself, Karina, it must be really exciting to like discover new places that are just opening, that are kind of like the new energy encapsulated with this Saturn and Neptune and Aries and all of this, birthing going on. So the Earth is not static. And it's, no matter what anybody says, the Earth is not on her way out. No way. Humans may be deciding to take themselves out in great numbers. But in terms of the Earth, no, the Earth's always going to be here. But the idea is what's the new Earth that we, as stewards and stewardesses of the Earth, I guess, what's our job? And that's what I felt called to be in Egypt for all those years ago. Was like, well, if I'm going to work, and I love my work as an astrologer, I love working one-on-one with people. That's my superpower. But the idea of working with the collective energy, I thought, I'm going to do that from Egypt because I like it there. And it feels like, yes, I've done this before. And it's not about bringing people to tour there. It's about opening that gateway that has to do with this frequency ascension. Because to me, ascension is just that. It's just rising to a certain level of frequency in our bodies and in ourselves. and realizing, yes, we are the temple. The temple is us. We are the gods and goddesses that walk the earth. And, some of us actually were around and built some of this stuff. So, of course, we know where the Hall of Records are because we were helpful in putting them there in the beginning. And that's something that it's almost like you just don't wake up to that. It's a process. And so when you said, Julietta, that you had a closure, there was probably a process of seeking, being on a certain level on the initiatic path that you completed for yourself. It's like going from being the student to being the teacher. And not that you're not a teacher and everything else that you've been doing in your life, but this feeling of this particular initiation path that has to do with Sirius, Atlantis, and Egypt, what that was that you may have been looking at through different lenses now came up close and central and very, very personal with this last trip. Because I remember when your first trip was just Julietta and I in Egypt, and you were ready to leave the planet, and go with the star people back then. So it's almost like you had to be embodied more here to get what that was all about. And now, and as Karina said, retracing your own steps, it's like, oh yeah, now I got this. This is really what is integrated now. And that's why why your last cacao ceremony was different, and I'm sure it was because of your energy. And I'm positive, like there's no doubt in my mind.
So I have to tell you, you've been in the room that I have where I lead these ceremonies. And so we did a Turkish coffee and Temple Tales event the Saturday after we got back, and two of the other attendees were present. And so I have some different Egyptian tapestries that I put on the wall. I have this Isis that's been there for a while. I have this other, it's hieroglyphics. And I really need to ask you, Mary, to describe more what's going on in this scene, because it's women in the scene, and I'll have to show you next time so you can see it. But my friend Doris gifted me a Sekhmet tapestry, and I've been looking for one forever, hadn't been able to find it. And so for my birthday this past year, she found one and gifted it to me. And I hung it on the wall. It's on these clips hanging, and it keeps unclipping on one side. And like, I put it back up. I'll go back in the room a few hours later and it's down again. And even last night before the ceremony, it was down. I put it back up and it came down again. And like the women in the room, like they were all going investigating, like, how is this happening? Like, there is no physical explanation for how this is happening. But I'm like, Sekhmet is definitely trying to speak to all of us. And I don't know. I will say, like, getting into a space of the impossible is possible. And, but I don't know if you have any other ideas on why this is happening. And
well, it is interesting that, you're mentioning Sekhmet today, because today the astrology for today is the planet Venus in Taurus square Pluto, Venus square Pluto. That's very fierce feminine energy. And again, to me, that's always Sekhmet when we're getting that. And so when you embody the archetype, which you do so well with Sekhmet, I think she's giving you the message. Like, okay, I'm here. Like, yes, I am part of this. I am now part of anything that you do. I'm not just separate over here, but I'm here, and acknowledging that. And just, you may, like today, especially because today's a real powerful day for it. Maybe just give a special offering to Sekhmet and just bring her in your own way, in your own space. There was a woman on our trip last November, and she bought one of the, Sekhmet statues that we all buy when we're there because they're so beautiful. And she put it by her bedside. And she called me a few weeks later after we got home and said, the statue is turning. It's physically turning. And she said, I thought it was just me, but my husband, who really doesn't notice much of anything about metaphysical stuff, said the statue's been moving. And she wanted to know why. So, we went into a whole thing with that about why for her personally. But I think once again, it was all about getting the attention of the person in the awareness. Yes, there she is. There is
Sekhmet. For people who don't know, I just wanted to bring in a visual of Sekhmet, and because she is the lion-headed goddess, and her name means the powerful one. So just so y'all have a visual of who we're talking about here.
Yes, very, very powerful, but in the love that, like, tough love, like a mother who protects her cubs and keeps them safe, but also, she's not averse to, like, attacking someone who's going to hurt her babies. So it's this feeling of, okay, here's the divine feminine, and we know Isis is the good mother. I've got Isis right behind me here on my head. Isis with the baby Jesus. We're coming up to, Passover and Easter in a day or so. We know that mythology connects ancient Egypt and the idea of Mary, Isis, baby Jesus, the risen Horus, or I should say the baby Horus. All of that fits. But then, we have these other two goddesses that don't quite fit the bill so much when we made that trend from goddess matriarchy civilizations to Western, especially the Western religions. They didn't really like Hathor because she was too sensual. She wasn't a mother per se. She was just this, like, sex goddess. That's how they thought it. Like, she was all about sex and orgies and drinking wine and all this stuff. And Sekhmet was even worse. I mean, Sekhmet was just powerful, and she could, kill you if you looked at her the wrong way. And so she became very, like, in the mythology of the Western religions, very vengeful and very dangerous. But it's so interesting because the only statue that's left in all of Egypt in a temple in the same place where it was erected 3,000 years ago is the statue of Sekhmet in the chapel of Ptah in Karnak temple. And again, my jury's out. There's all kinds of explanations about why they left her there. But the truth is she's still standing there. So no one's ever moved her. And now they're excavating all around her. And they've also made it that now you have to have private access, like private time to go into that chapel, which is crazy because for 37 years you could just go in there whenever you wanted to, but that's a whole other story. Now this idea is what's so primal and what she connected to on other dimensional levels that keeps her there. And so every time I go into that section of Karnak Temple, I think of that. And it's like, so now she's making her presence known in your office, in your room, in your meeting room. So it's like, okay, well, maybe, you're not going to go back in and have private time right now with her where she is in Karnak, but she's alive and her presence is viable with the work that you're doing. And I think that we're doing that now with all of the things. And one of the things I like to tell people when we go to Egypt and we go into these sacred spaces, it's like it doesn't stop there. Something now is in your DNA and it will be there forever. You don't have to, you can choose to not do anything with it, like latent DNA or, all that stuff that we talk about with the brain. But the idea is that if you want to work with it, it's there now and you've gone through the gateway. That pineal and pituitary gland has to do with opening the gateways. And so Karina and Juliet and the people who have been inside the King's Chamber really got that on the day that it was so vibed up. I mean, it was just, do you want to say a little bit, Karina, about what you felt when you went inside the King's Chamber?
Inside the King's Chamber, yes, absolutely. It was just a brief moment because the guides or the guards that are there don't really want you to do too much. But I put my hands just on the wall. I wasn't in the sarcophagus this time, but I just put my hands on the wall, and immediately I noticed the doors disappearing, and almost like gateways to another world are opening up. And it was literally, it happened in less than a minute, but it was so clear to see, and the energy in there was just so pure and really quite different from the energy in the King's Chamber with all the busyness of everyone going in and out of there. But it's almost like that faded out, and then the gates opened up, and there was this pure silence and just a beautiful space. So that happened in just less than a few minutes up in the King's Chamber. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that sometimes it doesn't matter who else is around or what the interference is on the 3D level, because when you have that keys to open, which, you know, obviously you carry those keys inside you, and that just opened for you. And that's and I always tell people, like, the experience is yours. It's like there's no guidebook that says when you go into the Great Pyramid and you have that time in there that you have to feel this, or if you don't feel this, then something's wrong with you. This is your experience. And so opening that was something that was particularly for you in that experience. And, you know, it's why when I do go inside the King's Chamber with people, I tend to not really want to ritualize it that much. Maybe sometimes we'll have people who want to go inside the box, inside the sarcophagus, lie there, and if they want people to tone, usually there's people who do sound healing that are just ready to stand there like two angels on either side, and you know, do a tone for that person. Some people want complete silence. Some people, like you, just want to feel it and not necessarily go into the box. But that is something that once you move through that, that's an initiation that probably you've been through in another lifetime, and you come back now and it's like, okay, it's like I said to Julieta, I got this now. Like, I got exactly where I'm supposed to be in time and space, and this is it. It's like you hold that now inside. And the people that you work with and come in contact with, whether it's family members, clients, just people in general, like could be standing next to you in the grocery store, that tone, that sound is just emitted now. And it's, again, it's like we talk about this a lot, like the 7 chakras that we know of that we work with in the body and healing, that once you get to a certain level, and the King's Chamber definitely accentuates this level, you're working with 7 higher chakras. And that's this idea of things happening that you can't explain. And it's not just being psychic, because we know pretty much, like, at this point we're all psychic, but this idea of working with in a physical body, in a heightened physical body, like a body that does more than what it's supposed to have been told that it can do. And just real briefly, my first experience in the Great Pyramid was I did go inside the box. And as I was laying there, it was quiet. I heard a voice say to me, "You're here to push the envelope on the human condition." And I thought, like, I'm like 37 years old laying in that box the first time, thinking, like, I don't know what that means, but it sounds good. And the idea of it was that what came to me later, much later in Egypt, was that the body is the temple and sound is the key. So this is what we've been working through for, you know, decades, is this idea of this body can do more than it was programmed to do. And if you do sound healing, sound toning, work with sound, even this idea of this sound that you can't hear, all of that is our next step that we're moving into. And I think it's really exciting because the age of Aquarius knows no bounds in terms of all of this. And when we talked about the goddess Shata, another really beautiful Egyptian star goddess, she wears the 8-petaled lotus upturned on her head. And so that's a lot of the idea of working with the higher chakras, because the stem of that flower comes right out of her 7th chakra and goes up into infinity. And so we're looking at, wherever you look in Egypt, there's a symbol that tells you something. And the hieroglyphs, even simple as an Ankh, I think every single person on the trip this time has something with an Ankh, whether we got an Ankh pendant or we got an Ankh wand or a mirror. You know, Ankhs were everywhere on this trip because of the divine feminine energy. But that symbol itself is so amazing, because when we see them, we see the goddesses holding the Ankhs on the temple walls. Usually she's holding it behind the pharaoh or the god, waking up that spinal cord, which is the gateway. I mean, raising that kundalini with the Ankh. So yes, it's the key to everlasting life. It's the key to working with all kinds of other energies. And once you go through that gateway, we go through the womb, which is the Ankh, that Venus sign, and then we exit through that. That's why Hathor is the goddess of birth and also the goddess of the West, the goddess of death. So we're looking at so many symbols. I could do a whole 3 hours just on the symbols of that. But the idea is when those symbols start moving and talking to you, like your tapestry, you want to take that really seriously because it's not a fluke. We're living in the land of synchronicity now, the dimension of synchronicity.
Because we were talking about the Great Pyramid, and this time I actually chose not to go in. Partially, I've been inside there twice. Once my own private time that somehow I manifested, even though I didn't pay for private time. Nobody came up there while I was in there, so that was very interesting. But the second time we went, we had this group, and there was a gentleman there from the Edgar Cayce Foundation who was recording. So we were doing a lot of toning up in that King's Chamber. And it was so interesting to me because, and not even our whole group was up there. I think there was 8, maybe 10 of us in the chamber, but it sounded like there were 100 people in there with us. And I know specifically, we only had 2 men in the group. And yes, they were up there intoning, but you could hear many more men's voices while we were there. And also interesting for me, I heard my own mom's voice while I was in there.
Wow.
And and that time I did get in the box, and everybody had 2 minutes in the box, to make sure that everybody had time in there. And they were toning while I was in there, but as soon as I laid down, I left my body. I don't know where I went, and you have your theories, but I don't have any remembrance or something to say this is what I experienced. All I remember was leaving my body, and then when my 2 minutes were up, I felt myself drop back into my body, and I came out. And these are things that you can't make up, but you go in there you're going to experience something. Each one's experience is going to be different, but if it's calling you, get over there. The other thing I didn't share with either of you, so when those of us in our group that were going there, for a while I was just sitting outside looking at the pyramid, meditating, and all of a sudden I saw all of the landscape in front of us covered with possibly hundreds of pyramids. It wasn't just, how many are there? There's 9 there that are uncovered right now or something. But it was
9.
The whole landscape was covered with pyramids. So I don't know. I don't know if at one point there were that many pyramids there or what that was. I haven't gotten a clear message on what that was about, but that was my experience this time.
Well, the way I think of it, it's there's the Egypt that we see, there's third-dimensional Egypt in front of us, and then there's the parallel reality of Egypt. So you may have been seeing one of the parallels of Egypt where there was 100 pyramids. And that's something that's real. It's like the myths of Avalon. Okay, it's real somewhere. And so is the 100 pyramids or landscapes littered. In all of Egypt, there were 109 or 108 pyramids all over the landscape from Upper to Lower Egypt. But up on the Giza Plateau, you're right, there was 9 to begin with. So we're, that again, you're seeing it with different eyes. You're seeing it with the eyes that have to do with perception of dimensions that as we're walking on 2 legs, we can't, it's almost like we can't know all that all the time because it would just be too overwhelming. It'd be like doing LSD 24/7. So it's, you can get glimpses, people call it peak experiences for a reason. You get glimpses of these peak experiences, and then you kind of assess it and integrate it and work with it until the next peak experience. That's something that I think, again, we're looking at so many things having to do with altered intelligence, with AI and things of that nature. I just hope that the human condition doesn't lose its sense of the magicalness of things, because technology can be magic, but magic is not technology. And so I never want to lose that sense of that peak experience of being in a place that just feels so amazing. And it could be just someplace in nature, or it could be someplace that's inside an amazing temple, or like the Great Pyramid. It's all about where we perceive our connection. Jung used to say, to the numinous, to what's sacred, to where do we find God? Where do we see God? And I think the lesson is to see it everywhere.
Yes. Exactly.
We do need to start getting wrapped up here. And so I do want to, I know we could talk for hours, but I do have another life that I do have to participate in. But and I did, so both the contact information for Mary and Karina are in the show notes. If you have questions for them, or you want to go to Egypt with Mary, or you want to study geomancy, their contact information is in the show notes, so you can reach out to them there. And just any parting words, Karina, any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience?
Well, I'll just say, visit Egypt, absolutely, because it may activate things inside of you that you never even knew existed. But also, if that's too difficult, just going somewhere at a sacred site near where you live and connect with that, and just be there by yourself. Walk around, pay attention to how you feel when you walk around. Try not to talk to anybody. And that's really, I think that's the best way to get connected with the divine. And so it doesn't have to be a specific trip or whatever. It could be right close to where anybody lives. So yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. And Mary?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. And this idea of like just finding the sacred in everyday life is really important. Because sometimes that's all you have, and it's like, if anyone is feeling called, like they do want to go to Egypt, my next trip is scheduled for November. But, the way the world is, we don't know. Like, I'll schedule a trip, but, let's just pray that everything works out, that we can still go to Egypt in November. But this, to me also, it's where you connect, like just having a space in your home, even. Like if you have something that you consider like a sacred object, a crystal, like Julieta had the Sekhmet statue, something that when you look at it makes you feel like I'm in a non-ordinary experience of connecting with something that's more than, the crap that I'm dealing with all day long or whatever. And then you set up your own little altar space in your home. It could be just part of your desk or a little side table in your bedroom, but something that you have that's your sacred space, and that you can go in there and just feel quiet on a daily basis. And sometimes the best way to do that is to have a deck of cards, any cards that you feel drawn to. It could be angel cards, tarot cards, anything. And each morning when you wake up, just pull a card. And that sets your tone for the rest of the day. That gives it kind of like a sacred ambience, something that you've done that connects you to something that's greater. If you can't walk outside, or if you live in a place where that's not easy to do, or if you're not that amble enough to do it yourself, that pulling a card, saying a prayer, just connecting with something that gives you a sense of divinity and specialness in your own life now is going to be more important than ever before. And I always tell my clients, if you don't have a spiritual practice, get one. And if you have one, do more of it, because that's going to be your lifeline now over the next, I would say probably until somewhere in the middle of 2027. Thank you.
Yes, thank you both for joining us today. And like I said, reach out to these wonderful women if you have more questions about Egypt, geomancy, any of this. Mary mentioned oracle cards. She does have some Egyptian oracle cards that are really, really cool. So check in with her if you're interested in getting yourself a deck. And with that, I do want to wish everybody a magical day. We'll see you soon. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Love you both.
Bye.
Bye.